next speaker comes again from the house here. It's Mrs. Kirsty Rancier. She works in the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, and she is now with Strategic Planning and the Interagency Affairs Unit, and she also has a lot of experience in dealing with young people, and her motto is "Youth as Agents of Change to Achieve the SDGs."
Super. Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you all for being here. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's truly a pleasure to speak about and for peace, advocating for it. And I would like to thank the NGO Committee on Peace in Vienna for the existence of this event. It's so important to see people from so many different backgrounds, so many different places here, to have these discussions and really dive into what does it mean to advocate for peace. So I do indeed work for the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and unfortunately I do not have as many props as the previous presenter today. And our mandates are intrinsically linked to building peace by making the world safer from drugs, crime, terrorism, and corruption. And what you might think when you think of these mandate areas is, unfortunately, and the story told in the media today, is that youth and young people are often the culprits. And I want to sit here and say this is, young people are advocating and moving for peace in their communities, and I think we need to change the story. So often when I speak with law enforcement, when we speak with people in their communities, there's this embedded kind of sense that young people are the ones who are doing these things, and I think we need to rearrange this thought process, and youth are the ones advocating in their communities. This story does not always match the reality. It's important to acknowledge the role that youth play. First of all, there are more youth in the global south in particular than ever before. We're seeing a large youth bulge in many places across Asia and Africa, and this is changing the demographics, is changing how we need to interact with our society, is changing politics itself. Additionally, youth are acting as instigators of change, not only in the future, but also now. So often the rhetoric is around youth are the future, and that is very true. And they're also impacting their communities now, and we have examples of that just from some of the panel members here. And thirdly, I would also mention that youth are peace builders and promoters of nonviolence in their communities, as we have a variety of examples from our work here at UNODC. This work is also not only associated with our office, but with the larger youth peace and security agenda as a whole. And maybe some of you are familiar with the Women Peace and Security Agenda, and perhaps you never heard of the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. This agenda was put forward by Security Council Resolution 2250 in 2015, along with other Security Council resolutions, including 2419 and 2535, and which really promotes the idea that young people are essential to conflict prevention and peace building, and need to be part of the process of integrating and building peace. Young people often face barriers to interacting in spaces of peace building and formal negotiations. From the lack of representation that they face in these areas, including in political participation, to societal discrimination, they are not, even though they may be the largest demographic, in a conflict setting, they are often the ones who are left out of the room. UNODC is working with state actors around the world, and we're also trying to make sure that there's spaces for young people to advocate for peace. One example of this is in a recently launched network of 32 youth peace champions in Nigeria. This is building off of a project that we previously did with Strive Juvenile, where we worked with young people to build their resilience and also ask them to work with children in their communities to prevent radicalization in the northeastern corner of Nigeria and the Borno province. This is really important, not only to have young people working with other young people, but also to make sure that they're acting as agents of change in their own right, with their own voices. UNODC's work here is not only connected to the Youth Peace and Security Agenda, but also the Sustainable Development Goals and the larger agenda for sustainable development. In particular, we work with a lot of different sustainable development goals, but particularly SDG 16. This emphasizes peace, justice, and strong institutions. In particular, there are not only these larger goals, but we have targets of these goals. One of them being 16.1, which asks to significantly reduce all forms of violence and related deaths everywhere. These peace processes are linked to conflict prevention, but also violence prevention at large. Often we talk about conflict and the absence of conflict is peace, but often there are violence that is perpetuated by organized crime and other forms of criminality which impede peace at large. We recently published a study at UNODC, the global study on homicide, which highlights the fact that many people globally have died not only from conflict-related deaths, but also homicide. And on top of that, this summer, my team published a youth fact sheet, which extrapolated all of the data related to homicide and added elements related to youth. So it's a much easier, user-friendly version for everyone to use. Not only does it include important insights, but it also includes important voices. We conducted an interview of young women who are directly impacted by gang violence to hear their stories and to understand what they've lived through, the types of migration practices they've had to go through, and their work to get an education is truly inspirational. I think often we hear these big statistics, but we forget the fact that there's people and faces that face them and have to go through these lived experiences. When we just hear the facts, sometimes we remove ourselves from this, and that's not what's needed. Instead, we need to see the faces behind these statistics. And one of these statistics is that from 2019 to 2021, there's approximately 440,000 people killed from homicide, or at least that's what was reported. And in fact, this is 20 times more than the total deaths reported by terrorism, and 4 times more than the deaths reported by conflict. So when we're looking at these staggering numbers, we also have to imagine the families, the individuals, and the people who are impacted. And it should also be noted that these stats on homicide are largely from the youth, especially when you look at the Latin America and the Caribbean and other regions which are astronomically impacted by these stats. So when it comes to ending violence and promoting peace, we need to take efforts to reduce violence and conflict, but we also need to take efforts to reduce organized crime and other forms of criminality where it runs rampant. In order to do this, there are things we can do here in this room, and I think it's important to act on that. We can always ask and advocate for youth to be more present in decision-making processes, policy frameworks at all levels. This includes having panels and sometimes ad hoc events where young people are present, but also making sure that they're part of decision-making processes. We can also encourage government, civil society organizations like yourselves, and international bodies to invest in youth-led initiatives and promote peace and sustainable development. I was in a meeting recently on the Youth, Peace, and Security agenda, and they said that the average youth organization runs on a grant of about $5,000 US a year. That's not a lot of money, but it also means it's a long way that they can go acting on the ground at a grassroots level to promote peace. And this is something that we need at an overarching level. And then thirdly, I think we might think, okay, we're based here in Austria, maybe you joined us from somewhere else, or maybe you do live here yourselves. We don't face a lot of conflict in our day-to-day, but as was advocated for before, we need to do things on a personal level to make sure that we're advocating for peace. Whether it's addressing climate change, advocating in your schools or in your workplace, or working towards one of the sustainable development goals. These are all things that we can do to promote peace on a daily basis. I would just like to conclude by saying young people are not just beneficiaries of the Sustainable Development Goals, but they're also key drivers of their success. Nowhere is this more evident than SDG 16 on promoting peace, justice, and strong institutions. Youth have the energy, creativity, and resilience to challenge status quo, and they are already leading efforts to build peaceful communities, demand justice, and promote transparent institutions. Their potential can only be fully realized when they are meaningfully included in decision-making processes. Let us recognize young people not just as the leaders of tomorrow, but as a change maker.